Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michael Pitt. I'm Pete's former attorney and now good friend. And I, too, am very honored to have been invited to speak, and thank you, Robin, for the invitation. My life pathway crossed twice with Pete. Once when I was about 27 or 28, when I was a young pup attorney, and Ken alluded to the case, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But more recently, when in the 90s, when I showed up at a convention of employment lawyers, I sat down at a table, got to know a young lady by the name of Robin Potter, and didn't know her. We just started talking and comparing notes, and got to the part about, who you married to, and she started telling me about this union activist living in Chicago, and it started to dawn on me that, was she really talking about my friend Pete from back in the 70s? And lo and behold, she was, and it was great. Pete was actually hanging around the hotel. We went out for dinner, and I think we probably, over the years, had 3 or 4 dinners at these annual conventions. So I was able to, thankfully, renew my friendship with Pete back in the 90s, and we stayed friends. I last saw my friend Pete in September when I paid a visit to his home. Pete was pretty sick at the time. If you visit with Pete in September, you knew that he was in a good mood and he was getting around, but he was still quite ill. And Robin had stepped out of the room for a while, and she was preparing some food for us. And I said, Pete, how you making it? He said, I wouldn't be here but for Robin. And he just went on and on about how wonderful Robin was, and the family members and all the people in Robin's family and his family that took care of him. He was just so grateful. And told me that, somebody said earlier that Pete became a different person when he married Robin. I couldn't agree with that more. I think that he became a better person having married Robin, and I think vice versa too. Although I didn't know Robin before, but I'm only guessing that she got a lot out of the relationship too. But Pete was very, very thankful for all the care that Robin gave him at the end of his life. He was very, very. The only time I ever saw Pete cry was when he was talking about Robin. So that says a lot about Pete. If you knew Pete, it took a lot to make that man cry. And so as I thought about Pete, I went back to my library and picked up a book that I really enjoyed reading a few years ago. It's a book by J.M. Coetzee, a renowned author from South Africa. Wrote a terrific book called Disgrace. And I had dog-eared a page. I remember this page. I've gone back to it many times. And he said, he was talking to his son. He says, become Major, Paul. Live like a hero. That's what the classics teach us. Be a main character. Otherwise, what is life for? And Pete was a main character in a life dedicated to getting justice for the rank and file, for the little guy, for the ordinary, everyday man, the one who was getting screwed not only by his employer, but by his union. And I can't believe that, I'm looking out here, was Pete Camarata a main character in your life? Is that an apt description of this man's life? He was so important to so many people in this room, a main character in his life. So, we heard about Pete's struggle as a dissident. What was he struggling against? In the 1970s, a number of Teamster leaders were convicted of irregularities in handling pension funds and accepting bribes from employers to stop strikes or reduce labor costs. In 1977, allegations of control by organized crime forced the Teamsters to yield oversight to the Central States Pension Fund. Fitzsimmons, who was alluded to earlier, was probably the most corrupt of them all, and for many of you, fortunately, he died early in 1981. But his successor, Roy Williams, was convicted the same year of bribing a U.S. senator, and his successor, Jackie Presser, who became president in 1982, was indicted in 1985 for embezzling union funds and giving crime figures no-show jobs. So Ken and TDU and Pete Camarata, I mean, they were fighting against real evil. This was just not some sort of an academic, hypothetical exercise for a class in activism. I mean, there was real evil out there that was in control of the Teamsters. And these young upstarts had quite a job to unseat this evil from this major labor union. So in the 1970s, we heard the story about how Pete stood up at the convention, and as a result of his courageous speaking out against that evil, had the holy crap beat out of him by the union mob thugs. And I remember Pete coming to the office with his badge of honor, his black and blue marks, his bruises. My connection with Pete was through Ann Thompson. Where's Ann? There's Ann. And Ann joined our firm and brought with her this colorful group of characters known as TDU. And I think I've represented most of them over the years. I know Steve, may he rest in peace, was one of my clients. I think Dennis Wade was one of my clients over the years. There you are. There's Dennis. Yeah, you were one of my clients, right? Okay, right. So, right. So, yeah, we did a lot of work for a lot of people in this room. Did I get your job back for you? Dennis, did you say I got your job back for you? I don't remember. Good. All right. So, Ken alluded to this great free speech case. Now, for those of you who are not lawyers, back in the 50s, union members were routinely being expelled from unions for speaking out against leadership, especially those who may have been associated with socialist or communist leanings. They were routinely thrown out of the union. So Congress adopted the Lanham-Griffin Act, which gave union workers the Bill of Rights, essentially the right not to be punished or retaliated against if you spoke out against the union leadership. And so Pete exercised his rights to speak out against the union leadership here in Detroit in Local 299. He was, a union dissident, and the Local 299 hierarchy recognized him as a dissident. But what does it mean to be a dissident? To be successful, you have to start a movement to challenge the existing institution. And Pete and Ken and Steve Kindred and Dennis and Joe Ehrman and so many other people that I knew along the way formed the movement. And it gelled. And it takes a great deal of bravery to stand up to one's enemies when you're starting a movement. But one lesson I learned from Pete, and I'll never forget it, is that it takes even more bravery to stand up against your friends when you're involved in a movement. Because not everyone who is on your side happens to agree with you. And sometimes you've got to fight within your own ranks to make things actually work. And Pete wasn't afraid to disagree with his colleagues, and sometimes got himself in trouble with his colleagues. But Pete took on willingly the role of a leader. And as a leader in the dissident movement, he did not give a flying F about his enemies, but he cared very deeply about the people who were following him, because he knew that if he made the wrong turn, he and all the people, all his comrades in arms, would walk right off a cliff, following him to the end into destruction. So he was very careful not to take false steps when he was in a leadership mode, so that the people who were behind him would not be harmed by what he was doing. He was very, very thoughtful and very, very careful. And Ann and I and other people would sit around the conference room with Pete, and Pete would just go on for hours. I had to literally throw him out of the room to get him to stop talking about the strategy of doing this or doing that. He was so thoughtful about what he was doing. He never tried to react. He always tried to think through everything that he was doing when it came time to fight the union establishment. So along comes this guy named Lawrence McHenry. Is he here today, by the way? I hope not. Yeah. And he was a vicious guy. And he led the charge against Pete, and the strategy of the union was to expel him from the union. And under the union constitution, if you did certain things that the leadership thought was against the union, you could be expelled. But they had to give you a trial. They had to give you what amounted to would be a kangaroo trial. And they gave Pete his trial, and they brought out witnesses, and the witnesses said that they had heard Pete say certain things that suggested that he was in favor of that wildcat strike that Ken had alluded to. They brought out witnesses who said Pete was a member of the International Socialist Party, God forbid. They brought out witnesses who said that Pete was guilty of associating with Ken Paff. Ken was the devil, and Pete was guilty of associating with Ken. Witnesses said that they had seen Pete associating with Steve Kindred, another radical union activist, and he was indicted by the union leadership and finally expelled. He came to our office. We prepared papers, Ann and I in Ellis Bowl. And we got the papers to the courthouse late one evening. Bill Wertheimer, a clerk for Judge Churchill, read the papers, drove the papers to the judge's house that night, had the judge issue a temporary restraining order from his kitchen table, brought it back to us, got a hold of me, came to my house, gave me the papers, and we had them delivered down on Trumbull, before midnight that night. And Pete was spared the expulsion. And then we had, a couple weeks later, we had a trial in court. Witnesses were called. One of the witnesses we called in favor of Pete had his car blown up the next day. Jimmy Hoffa Jr. was the lawyer for the local. I called Jimmy. I said, "What the F is going on? You guys are blowing up cars." He says, "Me? I had nothing to do with that. I had nothing to do with that." anyways, Judge Churchill ended up throwing the book at the union. Pete was fully reinstated and was given back his full status as a union member, and was able to go on and carry on his role as a dissident. So let me wrap up by saying that Pete became a main character in his life as a dissident. I think he would be happy to hear me say that he was a main character in the life of a dissident fighting for workplace justice for the rank and file. I think if you would say that was his main character role, I think Pete would be very, very pleased to hear that. Pete became a main character in my life and helped make my life worth living. Can anyone make a greater contribution to others than to do that? I think not. I'll never forget my friend Pete. He was an inspiration for me, and I wish him every wherever he is at. I hope things are going right for him. Good luck, Pete. Thanks. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. I do have a request from Jackson. He asked me to ask everyone to turn off their phones or turn off the buzzers on your, so they don't ring. My name's Bill Hackett. I've met Pete in 1979. I met him at Ann and Frank Thompson's house, and these are names you've already heard. I was dating their daughter at the time, and I had no clue about politics or anything else. I was, 17 years old. I was in high school. And Pete walked in. There was a steering committee meeting for TDU. And Pete walked in with a bunch of people. And that committee meeting was at Ann and Frank's house. And I was standing outside with Heather, their daughter, and he walked up and we talked for a couple minutes, and I thought, hey, that guy's a cool guy, Little did I know that he turned out to be one of my best friends for 32 years. That was the first time I met Pete. That was 1979, and we really didn't become friends for a couple of years. We went to the first time I ever really spent any time with him, we went to a demonstration in New York City. And I think there was 5 of us that went. I think Chris went, Chris Curtis, Frank Runninghorse, or Stephen Orcott, Pete, myself, and I really don't recall the other person that may have went. But if you knew Pete would travel on a whim. I mean, he would get an idea about wanting to go somewhere, and we'd go. And we went to this anti-nuke demonstration in New York, and it was amazing. It was probably 1 million people. It was huge. There were dance troupes. There were people in the streets lined up all up and down Fifth Avenue, and it was just an electrifying event. And it was just a reinforcement of how powerful people could be when they met together for a common goal. And one of the common goals they had was to pick up all the trash in Central Park. And that's what they did. They picked up all the trash in Central Park. Everybody was given a garbage bag and told to fill it up. And everybody did it. The place was clean. The police stood around in 300 or 400 of them in a group, and they wouldn't leave and do anything. It was a wonderful, wonderful weekend we spent in New York. After that, I ended up moving in over on Filbert Street in Detroit, and that was a house that Pete owned. 12815 Filbert Street. It's between Houston Whittier and Gratiot and Dickerson. And it was kind of a group of guys that were all like-minded, okay? We were all radicals, we were all revolutionaries. And we believed in change and in fundamental change in the system, and we lived together. It was a duplex, and we had 4 bedrooms and 2 kitchens, and and we had, let's see, Jerry Brown was one of the guys. I don't know if he's here, but he worked at Smith with these guys over here. And one of the things that made Pete such a wonderful organizer was that he made you feel that you were special, that he cared about what you thought about. And he would use that caring, nurturing feelings that he had to pull people in. And he was very, like Ken Paff said, he was kind of pushing from behind. He wasn't out there grabbing people and pulling them. He was moving them along in a direction that he felt they needed to go. And he thought about what he did. He didn't want to put people in jeopardy. And it's one of the things that we did. We had a group of people that lived together that were workers and were students. I was the student contingent at the time. And we were organizing in different areas. And Pete realized that this struggle that we're in is not just about on the workplace. It's everywhere. It's about human rights. It's about protecting those that cannot protect themselves. And it's about getting some justice in this country that we live in. And he believed in that. Excuse me. Johnny King was another guy that lived in the house with us over on Filbert. He was local 337. Phil Keeling, he turned out to be the president of the Mazda local for the UAW. We had people that lived in this house that believed in change and in fundamental change in the system. And Pete, when he joined the ISO, yes, he was a member of an international socialist organization at the time. And he belonged to that organization. He actually joined down in Cincinnati and joined me at the same time. We would travel this country, going to demonstrations, and when there were new TDU chapters that came up and they were having problems, Pete would take off work, or what he used to kid about a lot was he fell off the truck once and he hurt himself. And no fault insurance. You get 95% of your pay. Well, he had a little joke about, he'd let the insurance companies pay for his organizing people. And what he would do is he would go and he would talk to people, and he made it real personal with people. There was a gentleman one time, he was starting a TDU chapter in Brooklyn, New York. And he got harassed by some of the goons from the local. And Pete, it was 12 o'clock at night, and Pete's like, we got to go to New York. And I'm like, you're serious? We got to go to New York? He's like, yeah. We drove out there. We drove 12 hours to meet with this guy. And it wasn't like we were going to go you know, stay at his house for a week or whatever. I mean, we just went out there. Pete wanted to say that, you know, TDU was behind him, and that if he needed help, they were going to be there for him. And he did that on his own, and he did that numerous times. Pete was the guys that lived in this house on Filbert, and a lot of you guys know, because a lot of guys that worked at Smith, you were there a lot of times for some of our parties and some of our little get-togethers. And Pete loved to party. Okay, he loved a good time. He was a two-party guy. You know, he didn't believe in he believed in the two-party system because one wasn't enough, and that's the kind of guy he was. He loved life, and he loved people. There was a, you know, and part of this house that we lived in that Pete owned, and he brought people into. You know, I'll never forget this. We met this guy, Kati Satiki is his name. He was a South African exile in this country, political asylum. He was from Soweto, and his family was killed in South Africa. And this is, I think like 1983, 1984. And he didn't have a place to live. And Pete opened up the house and we gave him a place to live. And we had people come in from South Africa that were pastors and different activists from the African National Congress, and stayed at the house with us. I mean, we met so many people that were involved in the struggle for freedom, for justice. And that's something that Pete always strove for. Now, he was fearless in that he would not, even at the threat of his own safety, he would go out and he would organize. He would pass out the convoy dispatch at 3 o'clock in the frickin' morning at all these barns. And he dragged, well, he wouldn't drag us with him. We went with him because we wanted to make sure that nobody caught him alone. Because that's what these thugs that work for the union, that's how they do people. They catch you alone. And they would hurt him. So we went with him. You know, you talk about major actors. Pete Camarata was a major actor in my life. I learned so much from just watching how he handled situations. He had a gift that he could connect with people. And he did it all the time. And, you know, part of the success that he had with organizing at Smith was that the guys he worked with were his friends. They were in it together. And he cared about them. He cared about all the people that were in his life. He loved his wife, Robin. You know, I was with Pete a lot of the time during the 80s. You know, I lived in the same house with him for about 4.5 years. I never, ever saw a better change in him when he met you. He could not wait to get to Chicago every weekend. I can't say, I mean, I had I'm gonna wrap up. He's telling me I gotta go, but I can talk forever about my friend Pete. I got a lot of stories, but I can't tell all of them. And, you know, he loved his daughter, Amy Jackson. He loved you so much. He was so proud of these two. And, you know, I just thank you so much for inviting me here. I had an opportunity to spend some time with Pete, a couple of weekends with his family that just prior to his passing, and I'm really grateful for that time, and I love you, and just the best. And I love you, Pete.